Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life. Please take a moment to like and subscribe, it really helps.
Ever heard of a city hidden under ice? No, no, this isn't some fantasy novel we're talking about. This is a real Cold War secret recently revealed in Greenland.
It's a fascinating story, a blend of history science and a good dose of what could have been.
And what's our primary source for this deep dive?
Well, we'll be drawing mainly from a really interesting article on space.com about a recent discovery by NASA scientists.
Oh, so they were probably looking for something else entirely, right? And just stumbled across this.
Exactly. They were mapping the Greenland ice sheet with radar, expecting to find bedrock data.
Standard stuff.
Yeah, but what they found was way more interesting.
So they found Camp Century, am I right? And when I hear Camp Century, I'm just picturing, a small isolated outpost, like a little research station.
Not quite. Camp Century is much bigger than that. Think more like a network of tunnels carved directly into the ice sheet.
Whoa, okay, so we're talking about a whole subterranean city.
Pretty much.
Mm.
An entire city functioning beneath the ice.
That's incredible. Why would they even think to build something like that in such a difficult environment?
Well, Camp Century was part of a top-secret project called Project Iceworm. And it was really ambitious.
Ambitious how?
They planned to create a huge network of tunnels under the Greenland ice sheet.
Wait, so are you saying this was going to be some kind of a secret base?
Yes. And these tunnels were intended to house and launch nuclear missiles toward the Soviet Union.
Hold on, so they wanted to hide a nuclear launch site under the ice during the Cold War. That's crazy. Why not just launch from the U.S.? I mean, wouldn't that be much simpler?
Well, Greenland's location was a huge factor. I mean, it's way closer to the Soviet Union. Launching from there would give them a much faster response time. Add an element of surprise.
Makes sense. I guess during the Cold War, every second would count.
Right. So they envisioned a network of tunnels that would span, get this, 2,500 miles.
2,500 miles of tunnels under the ice. That's insane. That's like the distance from New York to Los Angeles.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling.
It really is. I can't even begin to imagine the logistics of building and maintaining tunnels in a place like that, with the ice constantly shifting.
Yeah.
That's gotta be a nightmare.
Oh, it was a complete nightmare. The ice sheet's constant movement made it basically impossible to create tunnels that would actually be stable.
So that's why Project Iceworm was abandoned in the end. The challenges were just too much to overcome.
Yeah, it just wasn't feasible. The
Ah.
cost and complexity of building in such a harsh environment were just astronomical.
So they had this crazy plan, but the ice itself just said, nope,
No,
not gonna happen.
pretty much.
Yeah.
But even though the project failed, they did have a specific missile in mind for it. They called it the Iceman.
The Iceman. Okay, what was so special about this missile?
Well, it's a modified Minuteman IRBM, an intermediate-range ballistic missile specifically designed to be launched through the ice.
Hold up. They were gonna launch missile through the ice itself. How is that even possible?
The idea was that the missile would essentially melt its way through the ice sheet using its own exhaust heat.
So brute force, basically. Just melt your way out.
In a way, yeah.
Yeah.
It would have allowed for a super fast launch sequence, since you wouldn't need those traditional silo doors or launch pads.
Wow. So I guess this whole launch through the ice thing was a big part of why they chose Greenland for this project.
Definitely. I mean, the unique properties of the ice sheet were a big challenge, but they were also a strategic opportunity.
Right. So basically, Greenland's location plus the possibility of these surprise attacks through the ice made it the ideal spot for this crazy plan.
Exactly.
It's wild to think about the kind of ideas they were exploring back then. It makes you wonder what other secrets are still buried under there.
It's a good question, especially now that climate change is literally bringing the past back to the surface.
Oh, right. We can't forget about that. But let's stick with Camp Century for now. What happened to it after Project Iceworm was abandoned?
Well, they didn't just abandon it, they buried it.
They buried an entire city. How do you even do that?
Well, over time, it was just covered by more and more snow and ice.
Ah,
And that's where this story shifts from historical curiosity to a present-day concern.
because all that stuff they left behind, all that equipment and waste.
Yeah. When they abandoned the base, they left behind a lot of hazardous materials. We're talking diesel fuel radioactive waste, even sewage.
And now with the Greenland ice sheet melting, all that stuff could resurface.
Exactly. It's becoming a real environmental threat, not just to Greenland, but potentially to the whole region.
Okay, so we've gone from a Cold War secret base to a potential environmental disaster. It's a lot to process. What's being done about this? Who's responsible for cleaning it up?
That's where things get complicated.
Yeah.
The U.S. government has admitted there are risks, with Camp Century thawing out, and they've said they're willing to work with Denmark and Greenland to address the issue.
So they're on board with working together, at least.
It seems that way. But the question of who's actually responsible for the cleanup, how much it'll cost, and even if it's possible to actually remove all the hazardous materials, that's all still up for debate.
So the situation is a lot more complex than it might seem at first glance. We've got this hidden city, a nuclear missile project, and now a potential environmental disaster. It's a lot to take in. Maybe you could help us break it down a bit. What are the key takeaways from this part of the story?
What really stands out to me is how Camp Century brings together history, science, and politics. It's a relic of the Cold War, a testament to human ingenuity, and now a stark reminder of the long-term consequences of our actions.
It really shows how the past can come back to haunt us in unexpected ways, especially with climate change in the picture.
Absolutely.
It's wild. We've gone from a secret city under the ice to a potential environmental threat all in the span of a few decades.
It really makes you think about the choices we're making today and how they might affect the future.
For sure. But there's more to this story, isn't there? What happened to Camp Century after it was buried, and how did it become a data point for climate change research?
That's what we'll explore next. Camp Century's story doesn't end with its burial. It takes a surprising turn, offering valuable insights into the very forces that are now threatening to unearth it.
I can't wait to hear more. Let's dive into that next chapter. Okay, so we left off with Camp Century, buried under the ice, this toxic legacy, a ticking time bomb. But you mentioned it's become a data point for climate change research. That seems like a strange twist.
It is. It is. After they abandoned it, Camp Century was basically entombed by all the snow and ice.
And
It became this sort of unintentional time capsule.
A time capsule.
Yeah. And as the Greenland ice sheet started melting faster and faster, because of climate change, Camp Century started to become this unique opportunity for scientific study.
But how can a buried Cold War base tell us anything about climate change?
Well, think of it like this: Camp Century is like this giant thermometer, measuring how fast the ice is melting. By studying how quickly the ice sheet is thinning above Camp Century, scientists can learn a lot about how the ice sheet behaves and how it responds to rising temperatures.
Okay, so it's like a real-time experiment showing us the impact of climate change.
Exactly. And it's not just about the melting rate. Camp Century also provides a historical record of past climate conditions.
How's that?
Well, remember, the base was built right into the ice, so it's surrounded by layers and layers of ice that formed over decades, each layer capturing a snapshot of the environment at that time.
So scientists can analyze those ice cores to understand how the climate has changed over time.
Exactly. They can analyze the chemical composition, the air bubbles trapped inside, even the dust and pollen in the ice cores. All that stuff tells a story.
It's like reading an icy history book.
It really is. It's incredible. We can reconstruct a detailed history of temperature changes, precipitation patterns, even the composition of the atmosphere going back decades.
So this forgotten Cold War base is now helping us understand climate change and its impact. It's almost poetic in a way.
There's also another interesting aspect. Remember Alex Gardner, the NASA scientist we talked about earlier?
The one who helped rediscover Camp Century with that radar data.
Yes. Well, Gardner pointed out that this data isn't just useful for understanding Camp Century itself. It also helps us understand how ice sheets behave in general and how that affects sea level rise.
So what they're learning from Camp Century can help us predict future sea level rise.
Exactly. By studying the melting rate at Camp Century and combining it with other data on ice sheet behavior, scientists can improve their models and make more accurate predictions about how much sea levels will rise in the future.
So this accidental discovery is providing crucial information for coastal communities and governments to prepare for the impacts of climate change.
Exactly. It's really valuable information.
It's amazing how this Cold War secret has become such a valuable tool for climate scientists. But let's get back to the environmental threat for a minute. If the ice keeps melting and those hazardous materials are unearthed, how bad could it be?
Well, the exact impact depends on a lot of factors, like what kinds of materials are there, how much of it there is, how fast the ice is melting, the surrounding ecosystem, things like that.
We're talking about some serious contamination, right?
Potentially.
Yeah.
We could be looking at contamination of the soil, the water, even the air. It could harm wildlife, disrupt ecosystems, and maybe even pose risks to human health.
So it's not just a local problem, it could have wider-reaching effects.
Yes, if diesel fuel leaks, for example, it could pollute water sources, harming marine life and affecting drinking water supplies.
And what about the radioactive waste?
Well, hopefully it's contained, but there's always a risk it could leach into the environment.
That doesn't sound good.
Yeah.
It seems like there are a lot of challenges when it comes to cleaning up this mess.
There are. For one thing, Greenland is incredibly remote and the conditions are harsh. So just getting to the site safely, removing all the hazardous materials, and transporting them for disposal would be a huge undertaking.
And then there's the question of who pays for all of this, right?
Right. Like we discussed earlier, the issue of responsibility is still being debated. It's not just a scientific and environmental issue, it's also a political and financial one.
So we've got a remote location, hazardous materials, a melting ice sheet, and international diplomacy to navigate. It sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It's definitely a complex situation. Camp Century serves as a reminder that the past can have a long reach, especially when it comes to issues like pollution and climate change.
It's a reminder that we can't just bury our problems and pretend they'll go away. But Camp Century has also given us valuable information about climate change. Maybe we can use this knowledge to make better decisions in the future.
Absolutely, I agree. While Camp Century presents a lot of challenges, it also offers an opportunity for learning and taking action. By studying the past, understanding the present, and looking ahead to the future, we can hopefully minimize the risks and find solutions to this complex problem.
So we've explored the history of Camp Century, its toxic legacy, and its unexpected role in climate change research. It's been quite a journey. But I think there's one more layer to this story. What about the bigger picture? What does Camp Century tell us about the potential for other forgotten relics, other secrets, hidden beneath the ice that might resurface as the planet warms?
That's a question that's been on the minds of a lot of scientists and researchers. As the ice melts, it's not just revealing the past, it's also unveiling a whole new set of challenges and unknowns.
So we've gone from a hidden city under the ice to a potential environmental disaster and even talked about the possibility of other secrets being revealed as the ice melts. It's been a wild ride. But now I think it's time to reflect a bit. What can we actually learn from the story of Camp Century?
You know, Camp Century is like a mirror. It reflects our past choices and shows us the consequences. It reminds us that what we do, even things done in secret, can have a lasting impact for generations.
Yeah. It makes you wonder what other unintended consequences are out there just waiting to be discovered. But focusing on Camp Century specifically, what are some of the key takeaways you think our listeners should really consider?
I think one of the biggest lessons here is about responsibility. Environmental responsibility. Camp Century really highlights how decisions made decades ago, decisions based on Cold War strategy, can have these unexpected environmental consequences that we're dealing with now.
It's like a cautionary tale.
It is. It really underscores how important it is to think about the long-term environmental impact of everything we do, whether it's building infrastructure or developing new technologies.
Sorry.
It's not just about the present, it's about the future.
We're not just living for today, we're shaping tomorrow.
Exactly. And the Cold War context of Camp Century adds another layer to this whole story, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure. It was a different time, a time of global tension and a nuclear arms race. It makes you think.
It reminds us that even when there's conflict, we have to think about the long-term implications of what we're doing, not just the immediate strategic gains.
It's so easy to get caught up in the moment and not think about the future.
It is.
Yeah.
And sometimes those short-term goals driven by fear or political agendas can lead to long-term consequences that we never anticipated or prepared for.
It really makes you think about the choices we're making today and what their impact might be years or even decades from now.
It does. But on a more personal level, I think this story also has something to say about individual responsibility.
Sure.
Well, Camp Century might seem like this grand narrative about governments and global politics, but it also holds a message for each of us. It reminds us that we all have a part to play in protecting the environment and ensuring a sustainable future.
So it's not just about what governments and big corporations do, it's about what we do as individuals.
Exactly. Whether it's being mindful of the choices we make as consumers, supporting policies that protect the environment, or even just raising awareness in our own communities, every action we take makes a difference.
It's a call to action, right? We're not just passive bystanders. We can actually shape the future.
Exactly. We have that power.
Camp Century, with all its secrets and dangers and scientific discoveries, has given us so much to think about. But before we wrap up, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier about other secrets hidden beneath the ice. What kind of impact do you think these potential discoveries could have on our understanding of the world?
As the ice melts, it's like a curtain being pulled back, revealing layers of history, science, and culture that have been frozen in time for centuries.
Yeah.
It's incredible to think about.
It is. It's like a whole new world is opening up to us.
It is. These discoveries could completely change how we understand human history. ancient civilizations, even the evolution of life on Earth. We could be rewriting textbooks, starting whole new fields of research, and challenging long-held beliefs. It's exciting.
It is exciting, but it's also a bit daunting to think about all the knowledge that might be out there waiting to be discovered. And with that comes responsibility.
Of course,
Wow.
we have to approach these discoveries with respect and make sure they're handled responsibly.
As we conclude this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with this thought. Camp Century is just one example of the many stories that are emerging as the ice melts. It's a reminder that the past can have a profound impact on the present and that the choices we make today will shape the future. What other secrets might be revealed as the ice continues to melt? And what other lessons can we learn from these discoveries? It's a question worth pondering.
The future is always uncertain. But one thing is for sure, as the ice melts, it's going to reveal more than just forgotten relics. It's going to reveal the consequences of our actions, the interconnectedness of our world, and the enduring power of the past to shape the future.
And that's a powerful message to take away from this deep dive. Thank you. Thought-provoking story of Camp Century. It's a story that reminds us of our shared responsibility for the planet and the importance of making wise choices for a sustainable future.
Please take a moment to like and subscribe. It really helps.